Hello, everyone. I got tongue twisted right off the jump. Thanks for being with us today. My name is Ashley Jones with the Venture Center, and we welcome you to today's workshop on cybersecurity for small business. So we've got two folks with Mainstream. We've got Sara Christie, who's the Security Custom Relationship Manager for Mainstream, and also Daniel Weatherly, the IT Director for Mainstream Technologies. They'll be here to talk us through all the tips, tricks, and tools and things we need to know to prepare ourselves as small business owners to keep the cyber folks and bad actors away online. So before we dive into today's workshop, do obviously want to thank our sponsors, as I do every time. You should probably know them by heart if you've attended any of our sessions. These folks are Frost Accounting Firm, the Little Rock Regional Chamber, Simmons Bank, and Wright Lindsay Jennings for their continued support throughout the year and years of supporting economic development, community improvement, entrepreneurship, and everything that we do. Some of those programs that we have coming up, we've got a Lift the Rock on October 22nd from noon to 1. This will spotlight business and tech collaborations here in the community. So we'll hear from Chris Wright and Bob East on that. Also on October 27th, we have a fireside chat with Garbo Hearn. So we'll learn about her and her business, how she built that business, and learn some interesting tidbits about Garbo Hearn on October 27th. That's actually an evening event, so a 5:30 to 7 p.m. event. So you can register for that. We've got limited seating for that one. And also on October 29th, we've got a VC Health program. This is an initiative we kicked off back in January that focuses on mental health and entrepreneurship. We know that's so important, more now than ever. And this one is going to focus on resiliency. And so we're going to talk to entrepreneurs in that space and talk through how they grew their business out of struggles. So we'll talk to them on October 29th. But today is all about cybersecurity. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sara and Daniel to present today's workshop. And we also, as always, want to remind everyone that this is interactive. So feel free at any time to use the chat feature at the bottom, the Q&A function, or the little raise your hand symbol down at the bottom, and we'll stop and answer questions as they come in. Okay, I'll turn it over to Sara and Daniel. Take it away.
Thanks, Ashley. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us, especially on a beautiful Friday at lunchtime. I feel honored that you're spending any time with us. So thanks for that. I am Sara Christie. I'm with Mainstream. I'm the Cybersecurity Relationship Manager. So I kind of walk you through the process of starting a security journey for your business. I've been here for 11 years, and over that 11 years, I've just slowly but surely been assimilated into the ways of security, kicking and screaming at some points many years ago, I'm sure. But I think that provides an interesting perspective for me when I help people start this journey, because I know how frustrating it can be. With me this morning is Daniel Weatherly, who is the bona fide security expert at Mainstream. He's the Director of Security Services. Daniel has been in the IT and security world for some time now, and many years. And he knows the ins and outs of cybersecurity. He's a certified information systems security professional. And he's the one that can tell you all the things that you never knew you wanted to or needed to know about security. And also informally, the one that babysits me when I need help knowing about things. So cybersecurity for small business can feel a little bit overwhelming for a lot of folks. I know we all hear cybersecurity, but what does that really mean? And how do we even start about that? We don't want you to feel that way. We want you to know that it's doable. You just have to get started. Doing something is always better than doing nothing. So just get started and get going. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to run through some common threats at the beginning. So we'll talk about the ones we see the most often and how they work and what they are. And then after that, we're going to go through some security tactics that you can deploy at your business to kind of address those threats. So we're going to move pretty quickly because we only have, a little bit of time, and we don't want to keep you here all night. And we are known to get off in the weeds a little bit sometimes. So if we don't move quickly, we'll really be here a while. So, and yes, if you have any questions, drop them in. And Ashley, will you wave at me and let me know if I need to quit? Thanks. All right. So first, common threats. How do the bad guys get in? There are so many different venues for breaches. Once you start talking about it, the list goes on and on. So we're gonna hit some of the highlights. Phishing and spearfishing. We all know about the infamous, maybe Nigerian prince phishing schemes. Those emails, we've seen those. And these days, they're getting more and more sophisticated. So they're disguised often as coupons. They want you to react really quickly and go ahead and take that bad action, clicking a link or downloading an attachment. And when you do that, it's like putting out a welcome mat and opening the door for a cyber criminal. So that's one of the major threats that we see. Ransomware, another big one that you hear a lot about in media. And that's just the theft of your data and the encryption of all your devices. So it leaves your business unable to function, essentially. It's if it were a physical building, all the doors would be locked and you would be standing out in the rain, probably crying a little. A lot of times the ransomware starts with a phishing email as the initial vector. So that's another common one. Next, we've got software vulnerabilities. So software is a living thing. A lot of people think like download it and you're good, but that's not true. It has to be updated. Vendors often distribute patches and do updates monthly, usually, to address these vulnerabilities. So when those are available, they need to be addressed. Anyway, sorry. Configuration errors. This one is, and Daniel can talk more about that later, but you have to set things up the right way. So if you have a device of some sort and you pull it out of the box, a lot of the things are going to be set to defaults. Those need to be changed. There are a lot of things that we have in our hands that we just need to make sure are set up correctly. Malware from attachments or downloads. So like we talked about with the phishing, if you take that action, if you open a file that you aren't aware that you should be expecting, that's another way to invite a bad actor to establish a foothold in your environment.
All right, I'll take this one. Talking about credential theft, that's probably the second biggest threat from on the list. And what that is, basically, passwords are either stolen by brute force attack, or it's a password that you have used on some other service or website. You reuse passwords, and one of those previous uses has been breached. It could be default logins, as Sarah was talking about with the configurations, or they could be obtained through social engineering. Sometimes those come through phishing attacks, where they try to get you to go to a website and log in, where they capture those usernames and passwords. The exposed systems and port scanning, we all have to have an internet presence for your business, whether that's email or a website, could be connections with vendors or partners, but we have an internet connection for our business, and we allow certain things to go back and forth across that connection. Email being a very common example. So you have systems exposed through those internet connections, and there are scans going on constantly. Any given day, your device will be scanned multiple times by people on the internet. This is done by automation and scripts that run, not by a guy wearing a hood sitting there, looking for you. These are automated, so that builds books of potential targets for these guys that they can then go buy these lists from the people doing the scanning, or they may be doing the scanning themselves. 0 days, what that typically, it means that you have had 0 days to patch for that vulnerability. What these happen is someone discovers a vulnerability within a product, and the vendor or software maker has not had time to patch or update it yet. and the information gets out to the world, and the bad guys take that, they weaponize it, and they start using it to attack. A good recent example is a Microsoft Exchange 0-day that Microsoft knew about, but they kept it to themselves as they were working on a fix. Then the information leaked out. The bad guys weaponized it. They wrote automated scripts to do the scanning and find the mail servers around the internet, and within days had infected over 50,000 mail servers across the globe and got a foothold on them. Malicious websites and malvertising. That may be a new word for some of you. If you're not aware, you go to a lot of these websites, whether it's Facebook or Yahoo, and you see all these advertisements on the web pages. Those advertisements are not managed by that web provider. They're managed by an advertising firm. So they have their ad servers. So the bad guys will purchase advertisements on these shared ad servers, and they will upload malicious advertisements. They may have scripts embedded in them. There may be images that have bad code embedded in them, so that they can serve those malicious advertisements across thousands of websites. And all you have to do is visit one of those websites. You don't necessarily have to interact with the advertisement, and it can infect your machine. Likewise, they also will create fake or lookalike websites, the goal being just to get someone to drive by and visit that website, commonly paired with phishing, where they try to steer you towards a malicious website that can then infect your device. Compromised partners and vendors. If you remember way back, Target, for example, they were hacked, and the avenue that the hackers got in was through a air conditioning or HVAC vendor, through some credentials from there. So if you partner with other companies, it could be Microsoft 365, could be Google, or it could be other vendors or partners. Taking their security seriously is important. So being sure you evaluate those vendors and partners, because they can be avenues for getting into your network. So,
and the other thing about that, Daniel, is that that vendor for Target was an old vendor. They weren't even someone that Target used anymore. Right. So it was out of date. So there's kind of a lot going on there. So now that we've, talked about the major threats, what can you do about them? What are some tools? What are some tactics that you can implement for your business to protect yourself from some of these very scary, dangerous internet things out there? Don't be overwhelmed. Again, this is it'll be fine. So we'll talk through some of the basics. One of the biggest things that we see is security policy. So even for a small business, so a 1 to 5 person business should have security policies in place. So it doesn't take these on this slide, the security policies tactics. These aren't things that necessarily going to cost you a ton of money, but they will cost some time. You will have to invest some time to sit down and really put it together and do it for your business. So things like acceptable use policy, consistently reviewing vendor policies, just like we talked about, requiring certain password criteria. So a lot of times we are made to change our password. Some of us are made to change our password so much. That's one of my personal grievances. Even though it's annoying, I know it's important, but those things matter. So making sure the password policy is a certain length, or that they have to be changed at a certain interval, or checking to make sure that they aren't involved in a compromise. Daniel can talk a little bit more about that.
Let me just add to that the policy is going to make sure that everyone within your company is on the same page, and they know what's expected of them, and they know that the management has bought into and approves this policy. So it's not just, here's a set of guidelines to go through. It's everyone knows what those guidelines are and knows that the company has agreed to do that.
And the security policy should be part of the onboarding process. So as you add employees to your business, you should, from the very beginning, be very clear about what those expectations, what those policies are. Because a lot of times if you don't know, and it's more than just saying, here's a security policy, read it and tell us that you read it, like you really need to talk through that and make sure that people understand what those expectations are. A lot of these, the security policy, the security agreements, the password policies for sure. There are also things that you'll find in a lot of regulatory frameworks. So if you find yourself in HIPAA or PCI or some of those sorts of regulatory bodies, this is going to be something that they will have as a requirement. So especially for venture center folks that are just starting out, a lot of what you're doing is looking to the future. And so if you start with good, solid policies now and start kind of incorporating that, when you get a large customer or experience a lot of growth and suddenly you have a bunch of requirements that you need to meet, if you've already started thinking about this, that's going to really help you be able to pivot very quickly and meet those customer requirements. Let's see, configuration reviews. That's something you have to set a calendar date and just make sure that at least annually you're going over and making sure that nothing's changed. So as your business grows, what works for you now, if you have two people and you both need admin access to everything because there's only the two of you, as you add people, what is the new policy going to be? Everyone doesn't need to be an admin, or do they? But you need to track that from year to year and make sure that you have a good handle on the changes that need to be made. And if you document it now, as you grow, it will be easier to continue that because you don't have to start reinventing the wheel essentially every time you start the review process.
Yeah, I want to touch on password policies real quick. One thing. Yeah. Something that is a huge problem is reuse of passwords. So are you using the same password for Facebook as Google or your work and Twitter? Reusing passwords, why is that dangerous? Because if any of those have a breach, number one, they're probably not going to tell you about it. And two, all of those passwords go into a database that can be easily downloaded if you know where to look. And then the bad guy can take those passwords and use them to launch password spraying attacks. So they're basically taking known passwords that people use and trying them out, see if they work. So don't reuse passwords. So I've got 100 different websites I use. How do I manage all these different passwords? Get a password manager, like 1Password or LastPass or Bitwarden, for example. That way you can secure that with a long passphrase or sentence. And that's what you have to remember, and then keep all those cryptic passwords within that password manager.
Yes.
That's a good tactic for passwords. I just wanted to toss on top.
Yes. And probably the best and most available for everyone. Most password managers also go on mobile. They have mobile apps, so you can use it on your mobile device and also on your machine. So it follows you around. So it makes it easy. That's one that I had to be really cajoled into doing because it was overwhelming to me at one point.
On default deny firewall settings, what do I mean by that? If you have a server, for example, and you're servicing your customers in the United States, then don't let other countries get to that server. If you have users within your office who need access to Facebook, but other users don't, block that access. It's making sure that the firewall at the perimeter of your network only allows the traffic that is needed for your business and blocks everything else. A lot of times the bad guys will try to use avenues in and out of your network that are not required for business use. So default deny, only allow what's required. Software configurations and access reviews. this is a really big one, and there's a lot of different topics within there. But software configurations would be examples such as roles, who's an admin, who's not an admin. This group of users can have access to do one thing. This group of users doesn't have that access to do that thing or access this data. So setting access levels within data as well as within the software that has access to that data. And then reviewing that periodically to make sure that you don't need to adjust it. A lot of the big breaches we have seen were misconfigured, Amazon S3 data buckets, where the developers opened up access to the data because it's easy for development, but it also gave the bad guys access to the data. So check those configurations. Geo blocking, touched on just a second ago. If you don't do business with certain other countries or areas of the globe, block that access from your devices. How do you do that? If you have a local area network, you can do that with a next generation firewall. If you have just endpoints like laptops and you don't have any servers, you can get things like an EDR or MDR, which are endpoint detection response, managed detection response software that may have that feature in it. Software permissions, that goes with the configurations I was talking about just a moment ago. Data encryption, there's two sides to this. You have your data that's on your laptops or on your servers, and making sure that that is encrypted at rest, so that if the bad guys get on your device, even if they can get the file, they can't access what's inside the file. The other is making sure that all of your connections are encrypted. A lot of the startup companies, they may not have servers. They're using software as a service like G Suite or Microsoft 365. They may be using EC2 and Amazon for their servers, or Kubernetes containers in Azure. But make sure that when you're connecting to those cloud-based services that you're using an encrypted connection. In a browser, the way you do that is you look at the URL, and beside it, you'll see a lock. And that lock may show that it's locked. That means you're on a secure connection, or it may show unlocked, which means it's an unsecure connection. The good news is most providers today will force you to an encrypted connection, but be sure you check that on all of the connections you make from your device. Network segmentation, that's again, if you have a LAN or a brick and mortar business, make sure that your devices are appropriately segmented apart from each other so that if one portion gets infected, they can't move laterally over to others. For the home working user, that means take your business devices, put that on a different network than the devices your kids and family are using. That may be a lot of the newer wireless access points may have that ability built in to isolate networks from each other. So that'd be something to look at. That way, if a child is doing something on a laptop or a device on the network that you don't know about, that they get infected, it can't get over to your business device. All right,
as a general rule, also just make sure your kids aren't on your business device, because
yes, good one.
They like to click on all the things, and it's always some kind of surprise.
That's a good thing too. If you are using a bring your own device, then try to make sure that that device is for business use or home use, but don't use it for both, if at all possible. It's just good sound advice.
Yeah. The next little section we're going into is it's kind of a processes, so things that you have to do and tools that kind of help that along. The biggest thing that we think everyone should be doing, no matter what size you are, 1 person, 10 people, 1,000 people, is workforce awareness training. Like we talked about phishing earlier, it's something we're all familiar with, but even now in 2021, it is still the single largest source of breaches. it keeps working, and so it keeps happening. And the best line of defense that you have is an educated user. So you can do that. So Mainstream, we partner with KnowBe4 to provide workforce awareness training, and I know they've got some information out on the web that's readily available. But even if you're small and you can't afford to spend a single cent, make sure that you're just keeping aware of general security, cybersecurity information. You can get that from a lot of different places. There's a lot of good Twitter accounts to follow for security information, and just keeping it at the forefront of your brain to kind of let it inform all of your decisions is the best thing to do. We think that training your workforce is the most valuable thing that you can do. The next thing is have good backups. If something happens and you lose access to something, can you get another copy of it? A good example of that is today when my machine crashed an hour before I was going to be here, and luckily I had backed up everything kind of compulsively before we got here, and so it was easy for me to make that transition. Just a mild amount of panic, but then we were ready to go. So make sure that you have good, solid backups. Daniel, did you have anything else to add about backups? I know
One thing to add is today, a lot of the ransomware attackers will seek out your backups if they are online and destroy them. So have a way to get those backups offsite and offline, or immutable backups is a word you can search for if you're looking for a backup vendor.
Well, and that's another thing is if you're a small business and you're using cloud-based services, if you're using G Suite or something like that, check with them. Almost every one of them have a recommended solution for backups. So if that information is there, you just have to go look for it, and it'll give you a really good idea of which way to go. The next is patching. Daniel talked about that a little bit earlier, but and I talked about it a little bit earlier, but you need to make sure that you are doing those updates as they're made available, so that you don't leave open doors just sitting out there for the bad guys to come in. One of the free ones that we have recommended is patchmypc.com. They will, that's a free one. Daniel, do you know what all I can't remember. It's an extensive list that they check.
Yeah, they have over 300 applications that it will scan for and automatically download patches and update those packages. So Java, Adobe, for example. Now, some of those have built-in updaters, but they're like Foxit. There's all, you'd have to go look. But yeah, it's over 300 different applications. And for just having something that's scanning and looking for the patches needed, that's a great tool. And then vulnerability scanning that Sarah's going to maybe
and
talk
also
a little bit more
about patching is when you're offered an update from a piece of software or a device, accept it. So a lot of times they'll give you a notification, and people are hesitant to do updates because sometimes it makes there are some functionality changes that people don't necessarily want to adapt to, but when you ignore those for the ease of use, you're also ignoring some critical security patches as well. Daniel, will you talk about vulnerability scanning a little bit?
Sure. So software has vulnerabilities. It's just something you have to accept. Microsoft releases patches every month. A lot of other vendors do too. Unfortunately, you just don't hear about that you need those patches. So this is a way for you to scan all of the software and configurations on your device to see if there are updates available. So anytime there is a vulnerability for software, they create what's called a CVE number, or a common vulnerability number. And anything that has one of those numbers, your vulnerability scanner should be able to detect it and tell you that you need an update. So patching and updating proactively is great. You need to do that. But then you need something that's going to do a scan that's going to find anything that you may have missed or that your tools may have missed. And that's where the vulnerability scanning comes in.
Well, and that leads right into compliance scanning, if you want to just roll with it.
Sure. Compliance scanning is more of looking at configurations instead of the versions of software. For example, are you using a current up-to-date encryption protocol or up-to-date encryption ciphers? Is your password policy that you have defined to be, 8 or 12 characters long, complex, etc.? Is your network set up to enforce those policies? So compliance scanning, we use a tool called Qualys for that, as well as the vulnerability scanning, and it will actually look, for example, at Active Directory to see that your group policies are configured to align with security frameworks like HIPAA or HITECH, for example. So
we see these
vulnerabilities. Yeah, go ahead.
The vulnerability scanning and compliance scanning, we see those a lot with the highly regulated folks. So as businesses grow and then all of a sudden they become PCI compliant, then you have to shift into gear, and both of those are required for PCI compliance. So
yes,
that's a good thing to keep in mind as you grow.
So other tools that you should consider, DNS filtering. What this does is it looks at the URL that you're trying to go to or that software is trying to go to see if it is known malicious. There are databases online maintained by providers such as Talos or Cisco that are watching web traffic 24/7 across the globe. And if they see malicious activity from a URL or DNS name, they add it to this database. A good DNS filter to recommend for small business would be OpenDNS or Cisco Umbrella. These are OpenDNS is free. Cisco Umbrella is a very low cost, but this is a great tool to prevent malware and ransomware. How does that work? Well, when that infection comes into your machine and gets a foothold, the first thing it does is try to phone home and make contact with their command and control server. It's going to do that with the DNS name. If that's a known bad name, it's going to get blocked by this filter so that connection back to the mothership for the bad guys never happens. So great tool. Spam filter, probably too many to mention there. If you're using G Suite or Microsoft 365, a lot of that'll come with spam filtering. But there are others you can even add on to that. Or if you run your own mail server, you can get them like Mimecast or Barracuda. Too many to mention all of those. But the spam filter is going to block some of those phishing attempts. And it may also block malicious attachments. Web filter is looking at the content on a web page. So where the DNS filter is looking at the name, if it's known malicious, the web filter is looking at, is there a bad attachment? Or it could even be content, like I'm going to block all websites related to porn or weapons. So that's what your web filter is going to do for you. Antivirus, anti-ransomware. Most people will be familiar with that. It's probably the most common tool used, but it alone, actually none of these by themselves will cover everything. That's why you have to have layers and you have to have multiple tools, is so they can cover the different avenues of attack and aspects, because none of them are perfect. Multi-factor authentication, I'll pause for a moment there. Very, very important. If you have credential theft, multi-factor authentication can prevent those credentials from being successfully exploited on your email or devices. Most online software as a service providers offer multi-factor authentication. Your Amazon, your Google, Microsoft, Facebook. If it offers two-factor authentication, turn it on. It's a minor inconvenience for you, but a major inconvenience for the bad guys.
I always laugh about this one because this is the one we get the most pushback about. And a lot of times it's business owners, CEOs, those types of folks really don't want that extra step. And But it's like the most important thing, and it's right there. And what Daniel always says is if it makes it inconvenient for you, it also makes it inconvenient for the bad guys.
Yeah.
So it's an important hoop to jump through.
Yeah. It also, if it's built into the product, doesn't cost you anything.
Free.
So
in a lot of
definitely
ways.
turn it on. EDR, MDR, it stands for Endpoint Detection Response or Managed Detection Response. Where you have your antivirus, anti-ransomware, those are looking for files on your system that are malicious. So it's looking for signatures within that file system. The EDR, MDR goes above and beyond that and is actually looking at events on the system and processes running on the system. So it's going to look at who's logging in and when, what files are being accessed and what process is accessing them. Did a process fire off the encryption of files on the file system? And it has the ability to automatically respond to those types of events and prevent. So for example, if someone double clicks on an attachment that has malware in it and it downloads the malware to start encrypting the system, the MDR may detect that and stop it from happening. So that's a great tool to use above and beyond antivirus, anti-ransomware. A lot of MDR, EDR packages will include antivirus and ransomware. So going that route instead of just the basic antivirus, definitely recommended. There are lots of providers of EDR, MDR. Arctic Wolf is one, Cyber Reason, ArmorPoint. A good Google search for MDR, EDR will turn up a lot of results and reviews available for that. IDS, IPS stands for Intrusion Detection and Intrusion Prevention. This is typically built into a next generation firewall and is important if you have a local area network or a business office where you have a firewall. Be sure you go with a next generation firewall. It may have web filtering, spam filtering, DNS filtering, antivirus, and intrusion prevention built in. A lot of them do, such as WatchGuard or SonicWall. So what this is doing is it's watching network traffic and looking for signatures of malicious activity. And if it sees it, it modifies the firewall on the fly to prevent that access. All right, data loss prevention is another item you'll find in next generation firewalls. What this does is it's looking at the data flowing through the firewall for things like social security numbers or healthcare information, or you define what it's looking for. And if it sees that data going across the firewall, it can block it. So it's going to prevent data loss of data that shouldn't be going across that firewall. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try to tie all these together. So we've talked about a lot of threats. We've talked about some tactics. Why didn't we just talk about the tactics at the same time we talked about the threats? Well, that's because the tactics may apply to different threats, and the threats may be related. So it's kind of, I like to call it a bowl of spaghetti, but hopefully this way of presenting it will help. What we've done is we've taken the initial threats that we talked about at the beginning, and then we've listed the tactics above it on the next two slides, just as a summary.
So Ashley, we will get this slide deck to you. We wanted this to be the takeaway piece that you can go back and reference. So I don't want anyone to panic because it's a ton of information on there. You'll get it. We'll provide that to you so that you can reference that back. Yeah. Sorry, Daniel, were you about to say something?
Well, I was going to say, and you may not be able to do every one of these items on the list or all of the tactics, but I do want to encourage you guys to look at them, evaluate the risk of not doing it, to determine whether or not you need to include it in your next round of planning. But the most important thing, if I had to pick just a few from the list, would be awareness training for your users, and make sure you're doing patching routinely of not just your operating system, but also your applications, and then the DNS filter. Those three are probably my top three of this list of if you are looking for the short best bang for the buck and multi-factor authentication. Absolutely can't forget that. So multi-factor authentication, awareness training, the DNS filtering.
The
All very
DNS
important.
filtering is super important too for a remote workforce. So those things are out with you. They're kind of distributed around. So it's a tool that follows you. So if you have that set up and your kid does get on your machine, it can kind of stop some of that bad outcomes from coming through. So that's a ton of information. We told you we were going to try to get through it pretty quickly. We wanted to make sure and leave a lot of time for questions. But I hope.
Did you show both slides of the?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So there's 2 slides of 5 apiece that we had there, and we can go back to them for reference if you need to.
But we wanted the takeaway here just to be that this is approachable. You can get started. Even in small little ways, like go ahead and turning on your multi-factor and those sorts of things. But as your business grows and as you move forward, especially now in the very technical world that we live in, just incorporating cybersecurity as part of your culture is the best way to move forward and to improve your overall security posture. And as always, find a good technology partner. If you find yourself in a place where you don't know what to do, find someone that you trust to be able to talk to on a regular basis to help walk you through these sorts of things and help you make the best decision for your business. And if that's us, that would be great. That is our contact info too. So we'll do some Q&A, but if anyone has any questions after the fact, please don't hesitate to reach out. I know a lot of times calling someone is a little bit intimidating because it feels like it's going to be very salesy, but I think especially around here, we're lucky to be a part of a community that's really happy to help each other in any way that we can. It's not so high pressure. So do we have any questions?
I was scanning the chat and I think I've addressed them, but let me look back through it again.
Yeah, we want to see if we can address some of those publicly if folks aren't on, if they're maybe on Facebook Live. So let's kind of go through and answer them out loud.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Our apps like Keeper that keeps up with my password secure. Daniel.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Our apps like Keeper that keeps up with my password secure.
Well, what you need to do when you are looking for a password keeper or vault or manager is search for their security information online or even reach out to them and ask them for their security information. As a business, I would ask them for a SOC 2 or an ISO 27001, which is an audit of their security that you can then review to make a decision whether they take security seriously or not. So that's the process I go through and Mainstream goes through when we're looking at any vendor, is ask them for those security documents and review
them. Is it safe to let your browser save your passwords?
I would prefer to use a password manager that integrates with the browser, such as LastPass or 1Password would be more than one of those. Is it safe? It has been in the past, but then we've seen vulnerabilities that allow hackers to gain access to those passwords. So I personally have not regained the trust in the current browsers to let them store my password. Is it better than using the same password on multiple sites? Absolutely. If you don't have a password manager, let the browser do it. It's still better than not doing it. But I would encourage you to look at a password manager that, as Sara said, it can run on your phone or your laptop. Mine is secured with my fingerprint on my phone. So biometric security, another great option for some of those password keepers.
Okay. Let's see. Is there a glossary for small businesses to understand the cybersecurity jargon?
I wish there was.
I started to say, if there were, I feel like it would be my best friend. As the average end user of the bunch, I regularly give Daniel and our other cybersecurity guys a hard time because they keep telling me about letters, and I keep saying,
"Yeah, we love to use
a little bit more." So, go ahead.
Say maybe Sara, you and I, we can work together and put something together that we can then share.
I started to say,
but I do not know of one that's out there right now.
we'll try to add some more info to our slides before we send them out, so that you'll have those and you can look there. But a lot of it, like I was talking about earlier in the awareness training, kind of just remaining informed, a lot of it is just the more you read about it, kind of the more it settles into your brain as a thing. It's a challenge though. And every time you think you got them, there's more acronyms coming your way. So it's an ongoing learning adventure. Are the slides available? We'll send those out, and Ashley, you can distribute however you guys want to do that. And then Daniel, what are some red flags in more sophisticated phishing emails to be aware of?
Well, the first thing you should do is if the email is not related to business and it comes to a business email account, don't even look at it, just delete it. That's hard for people to do, especially if it comes through and it's political and you are politically motivated or emotional. But that's the best thing you can think about. The other is, if it has links in it, don't click the link on your mobile device. Wait till you get to your laptop where you can hover over the link and see where it's actually going to take you. Quite often, those links are going to take you places other than what they say they are. But again, those are typically going to be emails that are not necessarily related to business. Although I have seen a lot lately pretending to be other people within your own business, or from your IT department if you have one, or your HR department. But again, check those links, and if in doubt, don't. Pick up the phone and call.
That's what
I know we all like to,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, we all like to correspond via email because it's quick. But if in doubt, just pick up the phone and call. Very easy.
Especially if someone that you know is asking for something that
doesn't make sense. Yeah.
That's so odd. I mean, I guess, but that's just odd. If it feels like it's odd, then double check it. We have seen some really sophisticated business email compromise that people have, called us about maybe after the fact a lot of the time.
Yeah. I have seen multiple businesses lose over $100,000 in the last couple of years because they took an email seriously that shouldn't have been taken seriously.
And think about too, what you share. We all kind of operate online. We have social media personally, but a lot of times on LinkedIn and those sorts of things, there's a lot of updates about what you're doing business-wise. So yeah, we've seen where a business owner was at a conference and was posting about the conference on LinkedIn. And during that time, a hacker got involved and ended up walking away with almost six-figure number, I believe, just from intercepting an email, because he knew that person was out of town and spoke to that and had enough details that he was able to. Yeah.
So let me share a little bit more about social media concerns. If you know where to look online, you can get free tools which will harvest data from social media. For example, it can pull from LinkedIn and build your entire organizational structure with names and emails all automatically, providing a roadmap for the attacker to use for spearfishing. There are also scripts available for free that if you can get answers to those common questions you see on Facebook, where did you go to high school? What's your favorite pet's name? That kind of stuff. Take all of that and it will build a dictionary of potential passwords based off of your social media information. And then they'll use that to launch an attack. So be very careful about what you post online. Be careful about answering any of those questionnaires that are out there. And just know LinkedIn is the #1 source for hackers to go to if they are targeting you and not just a drive-by attack.
Interesting.
I know. I love it when Daniel gets to talk about social media. It's my favorite thing.
Here's another one. What's your soapbox? Because we all know people that do it. They shall remain anonymous. What do you have to say to those that save passwords in the notes section of their phone?
In the notes section of their phone, I would tell you that every month, Android and Apple both remove thousands of applications from the App Store that are known malicious. And if you happen to have one of those on your phone, then they have whatever's in that notes file on your phone if they wanted it. So
it's just an electronic sticky note.
Get a password manager that encrypts them on your phone so that you'll have to unlock them with a passphrase or a fingerprint, and don't just use a notepad. Now, there were some questions in the chat, just to real quickly pull those up. A recommendation on a random letter, symbol, number, password, or a passphrase. I prefer a passphrase. So a sentence with punctuation. A, it's longer, so it's harder to crack, and B, it's easier to remember than a cryptic password. But of course, if you're using a password manager, you can use a very long cryptic password, but a long passphrase is my preference. Someone also asked, let me scroll down. Two-factor authentication is a pain. Just to mention that some of the newer two-factor authentication providers like Duo or AuthPoint, to mention a couple, they have the ability to push notifications to a phone. So you register your phone, and instead of having to pull up that number you have to type in or get a text and type in the number, it just sends a notice to your phone and says, was that you? And you say, yep, that was me, and that's it. So that's something to look at. Now, does that work with Facebook? No. But it does work with things like remote access into your office and some other things.
Like VPNs, I just learned that if you type push into, so if you type your password in and then you have to put the authentication code, if you type push in, it'll send it to my watch, and then I can go, yep. And I don't have to open anything. So it's really nice. There are lots of options.
That is Duo. We use Duo for two-factor in our office. So yeah, you can say, yeah, that's me on your watch instead of having to type in that number. So that helps ease the burden of two-factor authentication a little bit.
I feel like they're making improvements.
Is there a browser that's more secure than others?
I use Microsoft Edge personally, but all the big ones, they all take security very seriously. Just make sure that if you are using Firefox or Chrome or Opera or Edge, that it automatically updates periodically. And you may double check that by checking for updates periodically as well. So I wouldn't consider one more secure than another because they're leapfrogging each other constantly.
Mm-hmm. And we've seen lots of data breaches in the news, and lately we've seen some Facebook in the news, and also Twitch has been affected lately. Someone was wondering if y'all had any insight or thoughts about what might have happened there.
Well, I'll talk about Facebook in a minute, but another question here was best Twitter accounts to follow. I'll be honest with you, I don't use Twitter. I don't use social media, and there are good reasons for that. I use news feeds for my security information, like Krebs on Security, for example.
Krebs on Security is who I was going to recommend on Twitter for those of us that are.
Yeah, so Sara does Twitter, so she might have some ideas, but I don't use social media as a security guy. You're not going to convince me to use it.
So Krebs on Security, it's KREBS, Krebs on Security. Also CISA, CISA is the government cybersecurity and infrastructure security. It's CISA Gov is their handle. I'll type that in here. Some of those.
Threat Post is another one if you're looking for news feeds.
Mm-hmm.
But back to that Facebook question, do we know what happened? It was not a hacker from all the information I have seen and read. It was a mistake made by a human, which humans make mistakes, that caused their servers just to be unreachable across the internet. So that had an impact on DNS servers because they were overloaded with people retrying to gain access. But underlying it was a routing issue internal to Facebook. This isn't the first time we've seen this. I've seen this same problem happen multiple times in the last 10 years, where mistakes are made in routing tables, and it causes portions of the internet to drop offline or entire companies to drop offline until it's fixed. So I don't think that was malicious. I think it was just human error.
It does bring up something interesting though, because it could have, been malicious. So that's when we talk about access internally and who can access what. If you are a small business and everyone has access to everything for a while, if someone's disgruntled and they leave, what's your procedure for doing that? Can they take things with them without you knowing? You want to think about things. It's not fun to think about those sorts of things, but it is important.
Mm-hmm.
One other question came into the Q&A, and then we'll probably wrap up with one more if it comes in. Are VPNs worth having for protection? I think the answer is yes here, but feel free to expand.
Yeah, so a VPN, if you have company-owned devices that you have control over, then a VPN is a good solution to give you access to devices back in the office. If you're using bring your own device, it's questionable because you don't have the controls on all those devices that you're allowing access onto your network with a VPN. So there are other alternatives depending on your situation, such as remote desktop, which you're going to say, oh my, that's a big hacker's avenue to get in. But it can be secured as well using remote desktop gateway services as opposed to just publishing an RDP server online. But yeah, a VPN is better than nothing. And a VPN is secure. If you are in a public place using public Wi-Fi, definitely use a VPN, especially if you're connecting back to your business. Or make sure that encryption is that little lock symbols in your browser if you're using a browser-based software as a service. So do you need to use a VPN if you are using those online services that are also encrypted? Not necessarily. You're just encrypting encryption. So one layer is typically enough. So we use VPNs at our office if I need to get into the office. But if I'm not in the office and I'm accessing something online like Microsoft 365, I just make sure that my connection's encrypted from my device.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And we did have one last question. Hopefully no one's dealt with this recently, but sadly, I'm sure that's not the case. If my company gets hacked and someone is asking for a ransom, what is your recommendation? Pay the ransom quickly so you can get back to business?
My recommendation is, of course, it depends. What I like to say is, if your business can survive without paying the ransom, don't pay the ransom. And that's a loaded statement, because do you have backups? Are they viable? Are you going to be able to tolerate the loss of data? And then even if you have backups, don't restore the servers, because you'll be restoring the bad guy's access as well. Restore them, get the data off of them, and put them on new servers. So there's a huge expense. There's also cyber insurance available, which can help defer some of those costs, but there's also government sanctions on countries that if you pay the ransom, the government, United States government, can come after you for paying the ransom. So lots of aspects to that question. But again, if your company can survive without paying it, don't pay it.
Daniel's favorite answer is it depends. So
yeah.
I always shake my head because I'm like, well, on what? It depends on what. Cyber insurance, I do hope we get some time to talk about the limitations and capacities of cyber insurance in the future. Just know that if you have it, that's great, but it doesn't make you safer to just have it. And a lot of insurers are starting to get a little bit more demanding about what it requires to carry that sort of coverage.
Yeah, and they can help cover costs of recovery instead of paying the ransom. So yeah, lots of aspects to insurance.
Uh-oh.
Ashley, you're muted.
Yeah, trying to do too many things at once. Let me share my screen one more time. This has been both fascinating and terrifying, I'm sure, for everyone watching today. But it's truly something to think ahead about. This is something that could potentially affect you and your business. So it's just great to be aware of these potential threats and know how to hopefully prevent them. So I want to give a big thank you and round of applause for Daniel and Sara for participating in today's workshop today. They included their information in the chat feature, so feel free to grab that. If you have additional questions, reach out to Mainstream They're more than happy to help with your questions there. Also, a big thank you to our sponsors, the Little Rock Regional Chamber, Simmons Bank, Wright Lindsay Jennings, and Frost. And those programs that I mentioned earlier, just wanted to give some graphics you can maybe commit to memory. So we've got that Techtober Spotlight on Business and Tech, that happening on the 22nd of this month. You can register for that. And also the Fireside Chat featuring Garbo Hearn of Hearn Fine Art. We're going to have a nice intimate conversation with her on the 27th. So hopefully you can register for those. You can find us on all the different platforms. Daniel may not be able to, but Sara will. And so we've got all of these platforms available. You can follow the Venture Center to learn more and keep up with us. And we thank you all so much for participating today. And we hope to see you all again soon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye.